I think that's like a yellowtail.
Hi, Sophie. Right through the necklace, we got a kiss.
That's beautiful.
Oh, it's a hot fire. Let's move.
Hey Giovanna, will you say hi to the camera?
Wait, say,
Will you say hi to the camera?
Say Merry Christmas.
Merry
Where's
Christmas.
Santa Claus?
Look here, you want to see yourself?
See? Say hi.
Who's that? Who's that pretty little girl?
Can you say hi? You're saying Grandma for the first time.
That's an eel.
She always says Ning Nong.
It's an electrical eel.
That's you. That's right.
That's a shark. You know how you can tell? Because it has a...
Hey Mike, let's film each other filming each other.
Where's my Nicholas? Where's Nicholas, Mike?
Where's Tina? Let me find Nicholas.
Sarah? Is that Sarah?
Hey Colleen, let's get a gratuitous belly shot. Now you gotta turn the other way.
Like you're gonna be the new babysitter.
Alright, thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, ho ho ho. Mom and Dad.
Don't throw that. If you don't, here, I'll take it. You don't want that?
That's alright. What do you want to say, Ellen?
Stuffed mushroom is wonderful.
Hannah, who's coming? Come here. Who's coming?
What about Caitlin? Might be her year to be totally surprised.
Your bag of presents. Don't forget it, Santa.
Santa come down in the fireplace, but somebody put a fire in it.
I don't know why.
Too hot. Put the fire in the fireplace.
Santa Claus?
Oh, ho, ho. What's your name, little girl? Wow.
Okay, all the kids are gonna sit on the floor. There goes all the kitties. Come and sit on the floor and wait for Santa Claus.
What?
Give you presents. Santa Claus. Sorry, Ken.
I don't know what she wants me to do. Here you go. You want to hold the camera? He stepped in the way.
This is torture here.
We need to get in here a little bit.
Can we get a riser over here for the people with the video cameras?
Yes.
Have them face the other
We
way.
need
so
a
can stand by
photo
the door.
gallery.
Is there a special press section?
See, Rachel's right next to you.
Santa Claus, I love you. Santa Claus, I love you. You say, I love you, Santa? Keep moving, Santa.
Keep moving.
He has a present for you.
Oh yeah.
Let me give him a reindeer.
What's your name?
Oh, yeah, he'll it.
Let Santa sit there next to John Peter.
That's pretty.
What we do that?
Make room for Santa.
Hey, Santa, we love you.
Where's Johnny?
Santa, sit on your lap. Sit on Johnny. Johnny, sit down here. Oh, you want to sit next to Santa? It's up to you.
Avoid the middleman.
Honey.
Look at her laughing. Her laughing like a
Beard, don't get gifts.
That's right.
Better call it.
Katie's ready. Giovanni's ready.
Good girl.
Giovanni's like, hurry up.
Okay.
First of all, what?
Let me tell you a story.
She's dancing. She's dancing for her gift. Okay, Santa.
Well, let's see. You've been a good girl. You've been a good boy.
Girl. I want a dragon stick.
On a dragon stick. Have you been good enough for a dragon stick? What did you do that was good?
Oh, Rachel, you have so many things to do, honey.
That's Victoria.
Victoria.
Victoria's upstairs, I
She's
think.
sleeping. She's not feeling well. And Rachel, you want to get it for her? Rachel could get it. Howard.
Okay,
Yeah, she's not well.
excited for Santa.
Get those little.
Now let's see who's in it. Let's see who's Santa. Wait a minute. Wait.
It's for Kate.
It's for Kate.
Can you give it to Kate?
Oh,
Thank you, Giovanna. She gave it to Kate.
You've been a good girl.
Well, they're little ones. They can't sing.
Boys? Maggie. Anybody here by the name of Maggie? Maggie. Oh, Maggie. Are you Maggie?
That's Maggie.
Are you Maggie?
Looks like her. Off the camera.
You are?
Oh my gosh.
You've been a good
Yours
dear.
think they are.
Don't worry. You know what to do.
Good for what? I got a kiss for Santa. Haley.
Haley.
You gonna sing a song or do a dance? Sing Jingle Bells.
Jingle bells.
I'm taking it.
I'm shaking.
Anna, wait, make her sing.
You have to sit down. You have to sit
Bonnie,
down.
sit down. Johnny, sit
Down
down.
on the floor in front of Santa.
Johnny, Bonnie, sing Jingle Bells, please. Jingle
Oh.
bells, jingle all the way.
Giovanna, you gonna sing for us?
He really likes me.
Beautiful. Here, buddy. You open it right to your Rachel.
What do you got?
Here comes Rachel. Here comes
Well, you've been a good girl. Good for what? Sarah!
Oh, Sarah.
Sarah!
So he was where did you see him from? Okay, you hold your hand. Okay, I'll hold you.
A baby.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, I don't know.
Hey, Bonnie.
Say bye, Santa.
Sophie!
Bye, Santa.
Santa's not leaving yet, honey. He's not going.
Rachel, what'd you get?
Maggie, let me
Give Santa a kiss, Bonnie. Tell him thank you.
kiss.
Chelsea, what do you don't worry. It's not a monkey, it's a dolly.
Nicholas!
Nicholas! Nicholas D. Felice?
You Nicholas?
Do you believe Nicholas is here? Because he was standing up. Okay, let's put this. Oh, let's have
Sebastian!
Sebastian, where are you? Chelsea, what'd you get? You want to have Nicholas open it? Star. Johnny, can I see your doll? Johnny's rated.
I knew you're not a diamond baby. Oh, Nicky!
Just in time for Patrick to sing his song.
Joan!
Where are you, Johnny?
Oh, see adults too.
John Peter.
Are you gonna dance? Sing? Well, I gotta get more presents today.
Santa Claus. Santa Claus. And I'm afraid to put it in a fire team. I know, that's what I was thinking too. Maggie! Bailey! Over there, the green bag, right behind that lamp. Oh. Victoria is better.
This is John Peter.
Yay! Johnny! Yay! So good. Waiting. Johnny, you waited. Johnny's gonna sing.
There's only 3 pictures left.
Okay.
It's all set. Just don't focus it.
Right. Good job.
What is it? Can I help you open it? Did you say thank you to Santa?
Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
A monster beetle.
I think your mommy has
Yeah, I'll help you.
Baby O'Neill.
Baby O'Neill.
O'Neill hyphen Freeman.
All right,
Thank you.
Want me to help you? Would you like help?
Show Santa your belly.
Oh, yeah!
Go sit next to this one. Not on him, just next to him. Or just stand, don't even sit, just stand.
Johnny, would you like me to help you?
Give them to me, to Santa.
It's monster.
Ready?
Crunching over your
I'll
car.
put my yellow. You said you were getting me a yellow beetle for Christmas.
That's Kate.
Good job, buddy.
Santa, that's Kate.
What a treat to have her here, huh?
Santa, that's baby cakes.
Quick.
Yes, it is.
Baby Kate.
Tonight, actually.
Oh, really?
10 minutes ago.
That's a lot of running
I'm seeing him
around.
tomorrow. Actually, it's St. James right here, which is nice.
That's good.
I'm about to see him tomorrow.
Well, what did you do good to get this?
Yeah, it's a tough time of year.
They kissing?
Huh? Haven't you done anything good? What have you done good?
Oh, think of something, Sebastian.
Something you've done good. Merry Christmas.
Doggy on it.
Does it have a doggy on it?
Oh,
Oh, very sweet.
very cute.
You think it's good? Is he around?
He's behind you, Haley.
Oh, I mean, you're not around.
I love it.
That you did something good for you.
She's very pretty. Okay, she's
Kaki!
Like you walk in, all of a sudden, all of a sudden,
Good to see you. Good to see you, man.
you know, they all turned off. And went to tell you. And I was like, 5 years. Hey, does it go pretty fast? He's here. Sure, the flyer's all right.
You got a monster.
I swear I want that one. I could take that one home with me. Oh, she's just adorable.
I don't think you're into a working Hey, Nicky!
Hey, I'm glad.
How are you, my man?
Say hi.
Hi, you have grown.
Oh, that's good practice.
Maggie!
Sagi's gonna go miss a little time.
Maggie, M-A-G-G.
What did you do to get this? You don't know me, do you?
That was my favorite line.
Really? Ain't that your room, or is he not? Maggie's mother.
Yes, you did.
Grandma.
No, you didn't. Hey! Hey! Hey!
You're a little too good at that.
I'm under orders from my wife.
You should get some free time while you can. You know? Shouldn't jump into this thing so quickly. You're gonna be burnt out after 2 weeks.
Baby cake.
Oh, he wants me to videotape nothing but pop-up.
On top of me.
Don't pop up the whole
Rachel!
Rachel.
She actually had a neat idea. She wants to interview
What
me,
did you do?
Oh yeah?
which I think would be a lot of fun.
What happened to Sarah?
Pumpkin pie buns.
Anything good?
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, a can.
What do you want to hear?
She's stamping. She's not feeling well at all. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks,
Trip okay?
Yeah.
The hike, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not bad though. You're staying for the whole week, right? So that's at least a decent amount of time. At least you're not coming in for like a weekend or something.
Yeah. That's good. She's excited.
All right, Rachel.
I like it.
Joanne.
I got good reading time.
No one with explosives on their shoes.
No explosives.
Good, it's kind of
Joan!
Oh,
saw,
Joni, baby.
I saw your car. I'm very jealous.
Nicholas! Nicholas!
Okay.
Nicholas!
Santa seems to like giving her presents.
away, I'm sorry.
Oh, actually,
Ray's back there for a second.
he wasn't.
Rachel.
Chelsea.
John Peters don't hurt Santa, he won't give you any more presents.
Bye, Beryl.
Nicky!
Merry Christmas.
Tell me what you
Oh, that's Nick.
You're gonna have to get up and get it.
Nick and Ed.
Good grades.
Oh, look at her.
Wait till you see Patty.
No, he really hit his head.
Why does he keep filming this?
On what? Chelsea, come on, I'll come to you. Okay, take it, Johnny.
Johnny.
Johnny, put it down.
You're impossible.
What happened?
Santa, look up, Santa!
Johnny, could you get in the picture? Sorry, I'm trying to stand.
Come on, everybody!
Johnny, you gotta get in the picture.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, somebody already got it.
Shows up, everybody.
Thank you, Santa.
All right, is everybody still close?
Santa kiss. Very much tired.
Have a good day. Be careful back to the pole.
Bye-bye, Santa!
Bye-bye, Santa Claus.
Hey! It's about 50 years
All right. Okay, so why don't we begin? Today is December 26, 2001. And I'm Colleen O'Neill, the granddaughter of Herbert Luther, aka Pop Pop, aka Dad to many, great grandpa to many. Okay, maybe you could just start out telling us, you know, your birth date, where you were born, and
I was
related
born
info.
in the German section of Brooklyn, Ridgewood, very close to the car barns.
Do you know where that is? What streets?
Woodbine Street.
Woodbine.
I think it was 98, and I think they changed the number 198.
Okay. But like Woodbine between what and what? Do you know?
Well, Woodbine ended at the car barns
Okay.
and kept going into Brooklyn. It was a predominantly German section of the city, if you could call it.
Okay.
But it was heavily German. I lived there till I think about 4. We moved a little, I guess, in the summer to Long Island, and then into Brooklyn, Madison, and Throop, which we lived there until, like I can remember it, August 28th, when I was 8 years old.
When you were 8 years old. Okay. And Madison in Brooklyn?
That's
Madison
right.
is the street.
Madison and Throop.
Do you know what that area was called? Bed-Stuy or?
Well, then I moved to the Bed-Stuy area when I was 8. It was mid-Brooklyn, I guess.
Yeah.
And we lived there very close to a family that my parents had gone to school with Sunday school, so they know each other for a long, long time. And
Do you remember their names?
Borkart,
The Borkarts.
Yeah.
Okay.
and
When you were 8.
I left there when I was 8,
Okay.
from about 5 to 8.
Okay. And that was next to the Borkarts.
Yeah, we were on one floor separated, and we're very, very, very close.
Okay.
And my father started to work for Charlie Borkart as a bookkeeper and accountant. My father had well, it's funny, I read his diary years later,
Yeah.
and he came from, as the rest of us, a rather poor background. And he seemed to have, and I was shocked to read his diary. At 19, he wrote, would he be able to provide?
Huh.
So at a very early age, and he worked for somebody in New York, Tannenbaum, and the fellow was starting out with a fire prevention series where they put pipes above and the heat would melt the thing and automatically put out the fire. And he was a gambler, and he said, okay, you get a reduced fire rate if you have this. And I said, no. He said, all right, I'll put it in, and I'll take the difference in your fire prevention insurance rate for as long as it takes to pay for the equipment.
Tannenbaum said this.
Yeah.
Because people couldn't afford it, he was giving a special deal.
Or they had, their analysis of risk benefit was that it wasn't beneficial. And my father tried to talk him out of it. He said, you know, you're taking an awful risk, you know, these people can this and that.
What was the risk that he was, Tannenbaum was taking?
Well, he was paying for everything.
Okay.
And he would take the reduction in their fire insurance rate as a payment. Well, if they moved, you know,
right.
If there was anything wrong. And my father, a very conscious fellow, had a different risk-benefit analysis.
Okay.
And he tried to talk Moses Tannenbaum out of this, and he wouldn't be talked out. And my father left because he felt, this is wrong, you're making a mistake. And he didn't, because Tannenbaum became very rich.
Oh, he did in the end? Oh, that's too
Yeah.
bad. And when, was this before you were born?
No. This
is
when I was very young. I wasn't aware of the intricate risk-benefit analysis, but I realized that years later, a few years later when I look back. My mother was a gambler, mentally. You know, I mean, her was more emotional in decisions. My father was more calculated, and of course, two people can have a different risk-benefit analysis on many, many things. And so he left Moses Tannenbaum, who again became a multimillionaire out of it. And he started to work for Charles Borkart, a family that they knew had a wholesale grocery.
So was your dad, what did your dad do? I mean, what would you call his profession?
I would say bookkeeper, accountant.
Okay. And your mom was a homemaker? She
Homemaker,
was
but
home with you guys at
Yeah,
this point?
but you say homemaker. She had tremendous outside interest in the church, home department. And my father used to say, she's very heavily involved in the home department. Don't you think that would make her want to be home?
Right. So what is the home department?
Well, it was something in the church that the women got together and did things for others or something.
Okay.
But in other words, she had an external interest very hard. And
But she wasn't home very much.
She was home a lot, but I
Yeah.
mean, she also had an outside interest.
Okay.
That was, and later on, for example, to show her, they didn't have an awful lot of money, but she went to an auction in Cold Spring Harbor, and she didn't know the area, and they were auctioning off lots. She didn't know the area, didn't know it, and she bought 2 or 3. Gamble.
Just bought them.
Yeah.
Did she talk with your dad about that?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, but it was a good risk because she sold them and made money.
Did she?
Yeah.
Okay. Was that the first sort of investment or gambling, as you put it, that she made when you were growing up? Was that the first one you remember?
Yes, but I think if you took the decisions, it's, well, how much time does she spend away from home in the home department? That's a gamble of a different type.
Huh.
But she was a person who had large external interests.
Okay.
My father was very self-contained and hard-working, and he used to bring home from Borchards the stills that they made, and we would fold them up and put them in the envelopes and stamp them, he did a lot of things that we did for him that were menial in his work. Mm-hmm. And I can remember quite often he'd take me to his office and things, and I'd have a calculating machine, which he showed me how to go on. I would work up the sheets, and he would do it by hand, mentally. Just he would finish way before me.
Wow.
And I would check.
Some water.
I would check my.
There's water.
I'd check my calculations, and I'd have to do it over. He could do it much faster.
Wow.
Much more. I was learning.
How old were you around then, do you think?
Oh, probably 6, 7 years or something in that way. But I enjoyed and then
you liked being with your dad, and you liked the math.
Well, I liked them both immensely, but my mother was the forceful hand, and my father was, laid back. And I can remember my mother was a disciplinarian, and once when we lived in Madison Street, so it was younger than 8, there was something I was doing wrong, and she had the cord for the electric iron that she was chasing me around the table with it.
Did she get you?
No, I remember this incident very carefully. And as I was running around, I said to myself, this is stupid. So I just stood still in front of her. I said, go ahead, beat me.
Yeah?
And of course she didn't. But she never chased me again.
Really?
But it was a funny thing that I analyzed my mother. This is stupid. Let's see what happened. I just stood there. Go ahead, beat me.
And it worked?
Yeah, it worked.
Wow.
I had to be before 8 because of Madison Street. But it was funny. And my father was not the disciplinarian. Only once he hollered on me. They had a bed that was mahogany color, and I took a pin and wrote my name in the nice new mahogany bed.
Oh no.
That was the only time I can remember.
That's pretty self-incriminating kind of crime. You can't, say Gertrude did that, can you?
That's right.
Let me just check this to make sure that it's taping and you can hear you and all. Okay. Okay. So you were talking about your parents, and then maybe you can think a little bit more about your parents, and then we can go back and talk about, their coming to Germany and with their parents, or a little bit of immigration.
But as I said, I read my father's diary
Right.
years later, and what he wrote as young, you could see that it influenced his decision-making on risk-benefit and other things, because he came from people who didn't have any money, and so he always played conservative on the risk. But
How poor was his family?
not, well, you see, I've lived through the Depression and all of that.
Right.
Poor is a state of mind as well as finance.
Uh-huh.
And so I never felt ever that we were poor. We were by, you know, a lot of people, but they were a lot worse than us. And it was just part of life, you know, and I never really, even in the middle of the Depression, never felt poor. My first job I got on Wall Street for $12 a week, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president, came out and said that anybody who works 40 hours a week has to have a minimum income of $15 a week. So the big company that I worked for raised it to 14. Now it's rather indicative. Can you imagine today if you told somebody they were getting 15 minimum and you gave them 14, there'd be all kinds of... I never screamed, and I don't remember anybody else screaming. So this shows something very significant about today and then. So
Maybe you were desperate to have a job. You were willing to
yeah,
take
it was very, very difficult to get jobs, but I thought it was. And then I was working about 58 hours a week for 14, and I had by then 2 years at night school at Cooper Union, and still $14 wasn't much, but it was good because there was so many. My uncle...
Actually, let's go back to, maybe we should go back before we get into the career, go back to your parents and, you know, when your family came over from Germany.
Well, my parents came from Germany at around 1880 to 1890.
Okay.
And I have books in my libraries, I studied that, and one specifically dealt with that period. And in that period, Germany was starting to, as in Italy, where a lot of little countries within it, and Germany had these, and Bismarck molded them into one, and I think Garibaldi in Italy molded all of those into one. And at that time, according to my history books, each of these little states were starting to build armies to fight the neighbor next to them or to prevent a war next to them. And this was one of the main reasons for people leaving the country. Also, there was a shortage, the potato shortage and everything. And so my grandfather came in that period when people were leaving to get away. I'm not saying that was his motivation, but if you look at history and look at his age and the situation, that was probably it, because it was quite an exodus from Germany in those years. And they both came around 1880, 1890.
And their parents brought them and their siblings over.
Well, my grandfather came when he was 14, 15, 16 years of age, the period where he would have been put in the local army at the time, according to the history books, as the reason for the people left. He's the only one that I really remember. He was hard of hearing, he was hard-headed in his thinking. Now, whether that was conditioned by his inability to understand everything that was said to him, but he was strong from a standpoint of doing what he felt he should.
Let me clarify something that you said that, so your grandfather came here when he was 14. So your dad wasn't born, or your mom wasn't born in Germany?
No.
Okay.
All my grandparents came from Germany. My parents were all here.
Okay. so he came over when he was 14, and then how about your grandmother? Or on either side?
Well, the mothers, I didn't really know that I didn't know very well.
Okay.
My grandfather was a crotchety and hard-headed, but he
Your dad's grandfather or
father.
your father's father? Okay.
And in the place we lived in, Woodbine Street, he owned a house, and he must have been a conniving fellow, because he put the house in one of the son-in-law's name so that it would, I don't know, income tax or something.
Huh.
But he put it in so that it reduced, I don't know the details. And then when, come on, give me it back or something, he said, no, you gave it to me.
The son-in-law said that.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
my.
my name. And so this caused separation of the Luther family. That man and his group, and never spoke or never,
And your side of the family didn't speak to him.
and so that there was this cleavage. And it's funny how it finally ended. And when my father was retired in Gertrude's house here, there was a man worked for Fairbanks Morse who wanted to store pipe fittings, and Gertrude's house, built the little shelves and they put it in, and he said his name was Harvey, and my father spoke to him, gee, Harvey, I had a son-in-law, somebody who married Harvey, and it was the same family. And so my father got the two sides to at least talk to each other who hadn't for 100 years or something.
So the son-in-law of your grandfather was a Harvey.
Yeah.
Okay, and he made the connection with this guy who came over and did work at Gert's house. Your father.
No. The Harvey that met them was a fellow who was a salesman for Fairbanks Morse, and he kept the pipe pieces.
Right.
And my father spoke to him because my father was very gregarious that way. And so it came out that they were the Harveys and they were the Luther.
The Fairbanks were.
Yeah.
Okay, the plumbing company.
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
so the
And then
family-
he made them come together?
they
he
did, but
initiated
it
social
never
contact?
became, geographically they may have been 100 miles apart, but at least it was then a relationship.
Okay,
Yeah.
like through writing or something, they
Yeah.
wrote each other. So it took over a generation
Yeah,
for any contact to be
That's right.
started up again. Wow.
interesting.
Yeah, so how many kids did your grandfather have? In other words, how many siblings did your dad have?
Grandchildren, no, he probably had, well, if you look at, oh, you mean,
I mean,
while
like
he
how-
was still
Like
alive.
your father, let's say your grandfather who moved here when he was 14, do you know how many children he had? Like your father was one of the children and then,
Well, there were 4.
okay. He had 4 children and they lost contact, some of them lost contact with their dad.
For that period.
Okay, and they all moved they were all in Brooklyn during that time?
Almost all in the same area.
The
As a matter
German
of fact, in
enclave.
the same house on Woodbine Street.
Really? Okay. And the Woodbine Street house went to the son-in-law? Is that what happened?
I don't know,
Okay.
but I know there was no conversation. It was a clean
Huh, it's
split.
interesting, one of those unspoken
Yeah.
family histories. Okay, so then, all right, so your grandfather lived with you guys for some time.
Well, it was a funny thing. He died at 93.
Wow.
And my father's sister lived close to Maspeth, and he, in his later years, would stay in our house in Brooklyn and walk to Maspeth and have lunch or something with his sister, and then would walk back at night and stay in our house where he'd have breakfast.
How long a walk?
Oh, probably it was at least an hour and a half walk.
Wow. Maspeth, where is that?
Oh, it's part of where Brooklyn and Queens kind of come
Okay.
together. But he was hard as hell at hearing, and it was hard to establish a good communication with him.
So even though he lived in your house, it was hard for you to feel like you really got to know him because
Well,
of
I
language
got
and
to
hearing.
know him because he would sing German songs to me. And,
Yeah.
You know, it was a nice, he was kind then because there was maybe
Yeah.
85 years between, you know, those who were talking.
How did he establish himself in the U.S.? Do you know what he did or how
Uh,
he made his family and work?
oh, Butcher.
Butcher. In the German enclave of Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
And I have some of his butcher knives. I have one of them.
Really? Still?
Yeah. And a shoe polishing brush.
Huh.
I've kept.
That's neat. How do you think you're similar or different from him? Do you
Oh,
see
well,
any
because
relation?
he was hard of hearing and his judgments had to be conditioned by his ability to analyze what the hell the problem was. But he was hard-headed, and, you know, to me and to my father, because they couldn't communicate well. And it was funny, during the war, he went and bought some German marks. And my father was so furious at him because that was an anti-American
Right?
thing. And so there was some lack of good feeling because of things like that. But he was hard-headed. And yeah, always had to say, did he understand what in the hell was being said to him? Because we used to have a earphone. And if he didn't want to listen to you, he'd take his
Was it one of those like it looked like I don't know,
yeah,
a
it
trumpet
opened up
almost?
into
And he would turn it towards you?
you could talk into it.
Huh.
He didn't want it. So he was hard-headed, but you know, he had to realize he was alone, and
Yeah.
in the sense that communication was not very possible.
Okay.
And that's all I remember of that grandfather age, really.
Do you know anything about how your parents met?
Yes, my mother.
What are their names? Can you give me?
My mother's name was Zink, Z-I-N-K.
Z-I-N-K.
And she
Her
became
first name was what?
Rose.
Okay.
And it's funny, the baptism certificates on those times, she was Rosa Paulina, and birth certificate, and we had Italian, you know, spelling, and I couldn't figure. And I looked at Bobby's mother was a sister, and she had Margarita, you know, and in an American, to have it spelled in Italian, it seems strange, but her maiden name was Zink.
Okay.
And there was a funny thing in the history of that family. My mother's father committed suicide. And at that time, there was a tremendous antagonism between the Protestant churches, the Catholic Church and Lutheran, so Lutheran, I guess, specifically because they were the initial splitters off of. And so there was this, our religion's come quite a bit in the last 80 years, but they were terrible. And my mother's sister got friendly with a fellow who was Catholic, but they had to run away to get married. They couldn't get married. And they got married. The husband,
Bobby's mom. You're talking
Yeah.
about Bobby Pfister's mother.
and the
Do
man.
you remember her name?
The married name?
Or first and married?
Margaret.
Margaret, Aunt Margaret.
Margaret, Aunt Margaret. She ran away and got married, and the baby died and the father died very soon.
And she eloped, you're saying, because there were two different religions, Protestant
That's
and
right,
Catholic.
only thing.
Okay.
Then she came back home, joined the family, and she meets another Catholic man,
Right.
Charlie Pfister.
It was another scandal.
So she eloped again because
Okay.
you couldn't have a Catholic Lutheran join.
Right.
And then when their mother died, there was a younger son, Robert, and he went to live with Margaret, Aunt Margaret. And when he was 15 or 16 years old, he ran away from home and went to Staten Island and married a Catholic girl.
This was her son. Ran away from home and married a Catholic girl. He ran away because it was so scandalous to marry a Catholic girl?
Well, they couldn't.
Again.
But yeah.
This wasn't Bobby.
But what?
This wasn't Bobby who did this.
No. But I mean,
this is Margaret's son.
But this gives a flavor
Yeah.
of the relationship of religions, Protestant religions,
Huh.
you know, maybe 60, 70, 80 years ago. And to
And
me,
now two of your daughters married Catholics with no problem.
yeah, but so that we've come a long ways
Yeah.
in religion, but you can imagine when you analyze it and look back at religions, it gives them a pretty sad rating.
It was powerful back then. And so maybe you can go back a little to your mom and dad. Do you know anything about when they met?
Well, my mother was in charge of the Sunday school of the Lutheran Church in Brooklyn. And it was a huge thing. They had, I think, 186 people in the Sunday school, and my mother. And this was quite a meeting path, and the Borkarts, Buddy and that family, their parents were young, and they were in that Sunday school. And it seemed that so much came from the union in the Sunday school that it was a rather large thing, and my mother ran it. And my mother was a good operator, you know. She
Yeah.
she ran the Sunday school, and like she went out and bought the property. and
Of the Sunday school?
No.
Oh, like she did
Yeah,
when she
I
went out
mean,
to Cold
she
Spring
was,
Harbor.
My father would have calculated and thought about it. You know, my mother didn't buy it.
Right.
Sell it.
Make a profit.
But I mean, there were my parents, my mother, they were both very warm, but my father was reserved in his calculations and movement, and my mother was emotional in them.
So they met when she was running the Sunday school?
Yeah.
So how old do you think they were about?
Oh,
Late teens, early 20s?
early teens, a little younger than that.
Early teens, but she was running the Sunday school.
Well, I see how.
Right.
Well, she then was, a little.
So maybe she was in Sunday school with them.
I think that.
Okay, and they met in the
Sunday school
teens.
was huge. It was one that had, at one time on Sunday, they had the services in German, and then the next hour they had it in English.
Wow.
So that it was an area that, predominantly German, but had, and that happened in Brooklyn. It was.
So if she married someone who was not German, it would be pretty scandalous, right? It
I
was
don't know if it
expected
would be
that you need to
scandalous,
stay.
but it didn't happen.
Okay. So there was more pressure to marry of your own religion, and then it sounds like just some pressure due to living in the same area to marry someone of the same ethnic group.
Yeah,
like German.
but that's right. But
Okay.
the church had a very large German background. They gave one service in German, one in English.
Wow. And I realized I didn't get your dad's name either. What was his first name?
My father?
Yeah.
George
Luther.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So they met when they were in their teens, and maybe earlier,
Yep.
through church.
Yeah.
And they also got them at the Borchards then, right? They grew up together. And they got married in their late teens, do you think?
Someplace in there.
Okay. And so had Gert first, right? Gert's your older sister. When they were in their late teens, sometime then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or a little older.
All right. And then you talked
In
something.
their 20s.
Then they
Yeah.
had you how many years later?
4 years later.
4 years later.
3.5 years later.
Okay, and then they adopted Connie, right?
That was, yeah.
Your younger sister.
Mhm.
Okay, and that was, how much younger is Connie than you, do you know?
Oh, I'd say 15, 18 years younger.
Wow, okay. And you talked about how you guys moved when you were between 5 and 8 into a house right next to the Borchards, and then when you were 8, you moved again.
Moved to Hancock Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, another part of Brooklyn. Okay, and so
Yeah,
you
maybe
were...
10-minute walk away.
Right. And so were you and Gert going to school in that area then?
Well, we both went to the same public school in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
And then when we moved, we went to the same public school in Brooklyn too.
Okay. Near
And
Hancock
then-
Street.
Gertrude was a very, very brilliant kid.
Yeah?
And she zipped through with, and she went to Franklin K. Lane High School, which they had a section for exceptional students that had you graduated in 3 years instead of 4. Because,
From high school?
Yeah.
Wow.
And she crammed into that, and then she went to Hunter College and was at the top of the thing.
Yeah.
They had made A and took a lot of extra things. So Gertrude was very, very competent intellectually and worked at it. The Borchardt family, for example, the end of the school year, and their parents didn't inculcate any idea of studying and working, and Gertrude and I, presumably our parents must have had some effect.
Mm-hmm.
We were living one level above in the same house, and it was night and day. I mean, they wouldn't study, and Gertrude and I would be, much higher intellectually.
Do you remember your parents putting any pressure on you guys? I mean, where did both you and how do you think both you and Gert got that valuing of education
I think
from your parents or other?
I think it had, well, I'm presuming, and the statistics suggest that this may be the case.
Yeah.
Because, I remember at the end of the school year, these kids were carrying comic books, and Gertrude and I had a regular. And my mother, it had to be my father, I think, who, because he was more specifically involved in accounting and things like that. And he was more, I wouldn't say brainy, but more bookish by far than. They both only had, at that time, if you went, the parents went to 8 years in school, that was a hell of a long time, and that's about all they had. But my father, as I said when we were talking, New York Times is a very intellectual thing, and I mean, he would read that like crazy, and he was much more bookish than my mother was, and yeah, I can remember one incident because we had a house in Hancock Street, that's the second Brooklyn house. It had a living room that was 27 foot long, and it was on the second floor. And I think it had to be my mother put up the picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was running against Al Smith And there was a Catholic school not too far away where the kids who would go to the Catholic school would walk right past our house. And one day, someone threw a rock through the second-story window that went, the glass was 27 foot into the place. You can imagine throwing a rock in someone's home like that. And I can remember because before it, my father would discuss political things, and I'd get the New York Times and I'd read Will Rogers' thing, which was very
op-ed column?
politically, but humorously, and I would buy the Times and I would read it, and I would read it, you know, and discuss it. And as I said, my father would read it and he'd mark papers and we were going. And I remember I said, who were they going to vote for? And my father would discuss the political points with me, and I don't know why. Maybe the Will Rogers thing, you know, provoked it. And a lot of the things that Al Smith was saying, he said, gee, that's good. And Herbert Hoover was the conservative Republican at the time.
And Al Smith was what?
A Democrat, and he came up through the street. His speech was not elegant. He had a Brooklyn accent, but my father, gee, you know, and I said, hey, look, who are you going to vote for? He said, well, I said, you're saying so many of the things that Al Smith is good. You're going to vote for him? He said, I may, but you see, they were a Republican family.
Your family was Republican?
Yeah.
Your dad was?
Yeah, but he was...
conservative?
No, because he was saying what Al Smith was saying was a hell of a lot better than Herbert Hoover was saying. I said, well, what are you going to vote? Why don't you vote for Al Smith? And he said, yeah, sometimes I think I should. You know, I mean, it was I could talk to him as a young kid about the political factors that were going, and he would say, well, you know, Hoover wants this and that.
Right.
And